conversations here where we profile young women that are human rights defenders and that are doing so well in their work that we just have to get them, sit them down and just understand how they do it, to understand their struggles, but to also try and understand their successes and how they've gotten to where they are today. So today I have one such phenomenal person. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself to the people that are watching who might be unfortunate enough not to know who you are.
Hello everyone, my name is Caro Mudzengi, but people call me Q. I am a queer feminist activist, but I'm also a human rights defender.
Welcome to the show. So let's start it off with maybe the most important question of all. What is the scope of your work in terms of human rights defending?
I believe as a human rights defender, you cannot divorce yourself from all issues, because human rights are universal, human rights are indivisible, and human rights are interdependent. But you can, however, focus on certain elements that you feel maybe are underscored or underplayed. So you find, for me personally, what I've used as my passion, or identified as my passion, is the rights of LGBTI persons and the human rights of women, and basically just focusing on groups of marginalized people, particularly women, who for so long have been in the margins. And I see myself as someone who has a voice to speak, not just for, but with marginalized groups.
So what would you say have been your biggest challenges so far with regards to your work, particularly in a Zimbabwean context?
I think the biggest challenge has been, as a human rights defender who identifies as a feminist, it's always been thought that maybe feminists hate men, and that is really sort of taken away from efforts to try and help people understand that feminism is not just a women's issue, it's not a gender issue particularly. Also with the undertones and beliefs that gender is all about women. So it's really like a reiteration of principles that have been upheld for a very long time, where even gender issues were believed to be women's issues, and feminism, like gender itself, has been taken to mean that feminism is for women and feminism is anti-men. And I think that's been the biggest challenge, because it's been really hard to help particularly cis-het men to understand that feminism actually benefits them as well. So it's really a challenge. But I think also, as a human rights defender who identifies as queer and a feminist and an activist, I think it's really been hard to get people to understand that human rights are not a foreign implement brought into the world or brought into Africa. Human rights have always existed in Africa. Just we've had different names for it, like Ubuntu. You hear people say Ubuntu, Ubuntu, Abantu. And that's basically sharing mutual respect and love for each other as citizens and coexisting in peace. And that's basically what human rights is all about. And that's the biggest challenge, has been getting people to understand that.
So I would like us to delve deeper into what you term to be feminism, because also as someone who identifies as a feminist, I've often found that there are so many different definitions that, especially particularly people in the 21st century, have of what feminism is. Yeah. What do you think, or do you believe to be feminism according to you?
Feminism is an ideology, but it's also a way of life, because it's about challenging systems that oppress, basically. And with in mind having the fact that there should be equitable sharing of resources. And because women are underrepresented and under-resourced, it's usually believed to mean that it means women wanting to become men or women taking over. But it's not that. It's just saying, you know what, there's no justice in how resources are shared. Yes, historically resources belonged to men, but women also need resources. So when you begin to challenge those systems and challenge the distribution of resources and power, that's when you are seen to be anti-men. But you're not anti-men, you are anti-injustice and anti-inequitable sharing of resources and power. And that's what I believe feminism is about.
Okay, so you just reminded me of something when you started talking about the anti-men agenda. So there is a part of feminism which is called radical feminism, and a lot of people happen to believe that radical feminism in its core identity is anti-man. Is that true? And if it's not true, what is the truth?
I think I'm not a radical feminist, but I think what radical feminists are trying to, I think because of the injustice and the inequality and the inequity, there are a few individuals who are angry and depressed by the status quo and how they act out on that. And it's not anger at men, it's anger at the system. And because the system favors men, radical feminists are believed to be anti-men. But it's not, we are not at war with individuals. We are at war with systems that privilege and give power to other people over others. And I believe what radical feminists are trying to do or trying to change is that inequity, that injustice between, it could be between men and women, it could be between the rich and the poor. I think feminism is not just about what people have between their legs and what they're saying, you know. I also believe that men can be feminists because by virtue of what feminism is, it's just someone who stands up against social injustice, economic injustice, racial injustice, environmental injustice, and all the injustices that you can think of. And I think really as human rights, and I always tell people that feminists are human rights defenders. Because human rights it's an encapsulation of things that existed in our society. There were ways of dividing labor, for example. And in as much as we hear hunter-gatherers, there were some men who were gatherers and there were some women who were hunters, but you don't hear about that because there's a narrative that people are trying to push.
Her thoughts are very interesting, and I'm sure the people that are watching also do agree with me.
Yes.
So what would you say have been some of your most notable achievements with regards to your work in activism as a human rights defender?
I think there are a lot, but I think the main one that really touched my heart, I was awarded the inaugural Aejay LGBTI Activist Award. And it's funny because I did not see that coming. When they said there was one more person, I didn't think it was me. I was actually on my phone when someone said, hey, you know, because there are so many people who have done so much for human rights and for the human rights of LGBTI persons in particular, who I felt were more deserving. But it's also very touching to have it. I'm not that old, maybe I'm young, I'm just in between. But I think there's really so much that appreciation does. You know, I think as human rights defenders we get tired, we get exhausted, and things like that really sort of, you know, replenish you and make you want to push further. And yeah, I think that was, so far and I feel like I'm only crawling, you know, in terms of my journey as a human rights defender. Because I see so many people who I respect and hold in high regard. And to be considered one of those people really touched me.
So with regards to the Zimbabwean context, what we've seen is that across the human rights spectrum, a lot of human rights defenders have had to self-censor what they say, what they do, the initiatives, projects that they do, because of the politically volatile situation that we find ourselves in. We hear of activists that have gone missing. For years now, we hear of activists that have been arrested, some are beaten, some are raped. We hear of so many things, particularly horrible things happening to human rights defenders in Zimbabwe. How would you say this has impacted your work throughout the, is it 13 years now that you've been in this space?
You know, it's really a challenge. And I believe, you know, I was discussing with someone earlier, they said, you know, the biggest challenge that we have as social justice movements is that political causes take up social justice causes. And it's not, the two can be divorced, you know, because when a leader presents themselves wanting to lead, they will speak of the issues on the ground. So it's really, for me, what it has done is given me time to reflect on who I am as a human rights defender, and really taken time to understand the context that I'm in. But you know, it's really not that easy. I think being a human rights defender in Zimbabwe is a challenge, and as one particularly who pushes or advocates for LGBTI rights as well, it's like an added layer. But you know, you pray and hope that whatever is happening gets redressed, and that those who push for justice and equity get what they want. So but at the same time, I think it's a you give yourself to it, and you know, I'm thinking of certain people that are my friends who have passed on, because they, you know, it's very difficult to live in this country as a human rights defender. But at the same time, I think the bigger challenge is how to keep pushing even when you get pushback. And I really respect those who have given themselves wholly and fully to the fight for human rights.
We also happen to be in an election year, and the nomination court has already set, and we've seen the list of candidates that are representing the different political parties that are there. And what is obviously striking to any human rights defender out there, particularly those that are for women, is that there is again a lack of women that are running. When you look at the 11 presidential candidates, none of them are female. When you look at the candidates that represent MPs, that represent even councillors, there is not really that many women that you can actually count to say that they will be enough to represent us. So as a human rights defender, particularly who's interested with women, where is the future? Do you see anything changing in the next 5 years?
I think the bigger challenge, and I think as a society, and being in the LGBTI spaces has really helped me understand this. I think as a society we get too caught up in male-female. Yet the problem is not that. So it's something that that is put in place to make us worry about things that don't. I'm not saying women shouldn't be in those positions, but true change comes beyond having women in spaces. And that's also within the feminist space. I've gotten to understand that. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be women in the space, but what I'm saying is we don't need women to have change in that space. Change has to happen. I'm not sure I can put it.
I hear where you're coming from.
It's more than just having men or women in the space, but we need systems in place. We need people that constantly challenge. Because if patriarchy, for example, there are women who are patriarchs. There are women who love the fact that men have privilege and power, and they will support that. So what's the use of having a woman patriarch or a male feminist in the space? So I'm not saying it's ideal. It's not ideal. By right, there should be half-half if possible, because there are more women in any country than men. So a representation of those groups should be then equitable. But given the situation that we have in our hands now, let us not dwell on whether there are women or men in the space, but who are those individuals and what change can they bring if there is need for change.
But where do we begin now? Because
it's a systemic oppression. That's what patriarchy is, and so many other master's house tools. But patriarchy makes us as women as well turn against each other. And I think the focus should not be on whether we are led by a man or a woman, whether it's councillor, whether it's MP, but who is that individual? How can I speak to them to change whatever systems are in place that oppress me as an individual?
Isn't it also then true to say that a person is more receptive to an idea, or rather the pain that I'll most likely be able to respond to is pain that I felt.
Yeah.
So with that kind of idea being something that most people believe to be true, isn't it then okay to then say let's have an equal representation of the genders in parliament?
And I'm definitely for that. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be women in politics. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to look beyond that, because some women in politics can actually add to the problem. So it's about systemic change and how, from socialization, from enterprises, from every sphere that a person influences, there needs to be a change in the way we look at things. And I know I'm sounding a bit like a radical feminist, but I'm not.
Trust me, you know it.
Yeah, and I feel going forward, these elections have, the cement is drying. But I think going forward, it would be very important to have more women in the space, because and the thing is, women are not a homogeneous group, so we need to, in the future, really look at how we can engage all spheres in the community, how we can engage all people, because women are saying there are no women, and intersex people are saying there's no intersex person, So we need to look at it in a way that when I once told a friend of mine that the problems we have as Zimbabwe cannot be changed by an individual. It needs to be everyone's role. Every citizen is responsible for the country, and we need going forward. We need to work as a unit, and because